time, we left off talking a little bit about a subject that we're going to talk about most of the night tonight. Initiation. It's also the time to think about things like H.G. Wells and alley-oop. Both of them have involved in them a time machine where people go to different periods in time, mostly in the past, not so much in the future. That's the famous, one of the first science fiction novels ever was H.G. Wells' Time Machine. And it's basically the idea that if there is a device that could tune in to a different period of time, you could relive or pre-live that experiences of that time. If you take the physics notion of that, the idea that the light that comes out from the solar system that is reflected off of the Earth would bear in it all of the impressions of the experiences from the Earth, and if you could go faster than the speed of light, far enough out, you could get light that started from long enough ago that you could see things that had happened on the Earth long, long, long ago. Also, the idea is that the light that surrounds us right now impresses itself on different media, and if you could have a device sensitive enough, you could pick off the impressions of the light on the media and then have a recording of everything that happened. Now, spiritual philosophers, seers, claim that there is such a device that is that sensitive, and that is the human organism. And that is in the various subtle bodies that we have. We are capable, if we gain control of them and attune our consciousness to them, we are capable of picking up anything from various levels of memory of nature, some lasting only a few thousands of years and some lasting millions of years. And there are some impressions on different spiritual worlds that are as old as the cosmos itself. Now, it's pretty obvious that the physics notion of a time machine doesn't work very well with the future, because you can't race ahead of time, ahead of light that hasn't been emanated yet. And so you're stuck with where is light going to emanate from, or what matter is going to be turned into energy that's going to carry it. So we have to go to the spiritual notion again of understanding time, and that is the concept of understanding the expanded moment. And that if we can tune into a moment and focus more intensely and get within it more, that our consciousness extends to both past and future, as much of that future that has been brought out of the moment. And so we can see that for the amount of the creation that is already determined, the basic archetypal structure, the primordial atom that we've been talking about with regard to future evolution, that much can be experienced in the future, and all of the past can be experienced, even though it isn't a matter of we can't relive the past. We can experience the past as though we were living non-participatorily in it. Even if we see our own past lives, we watch them and we don't really participate, and we see ourselves inside of the old past life as well as seeing ourselves from the outside. Now, there's a very important principle in all of this. We've talked in the past about stragglers, and we've talked in the past about failures, about the failures of the Earth being associated with the moon, in that very deadly, devastating time in Lemuria when a horrible type of black magic took place. But in the same way, if it is possible to fall behind the pace of evolution, to fall away from evolution, by the same possibility, it's possible to move ahead of the time or the pulse or the rhythm, and one can actually and effectually live in what will be qualities of the future by living the things that will unfold in the future that are already built into us as microcosms of the primordial atom, and that are built into the general macrocosmic primordial atom, the whole structure of the universe itself. However, this requires very extreme effort. As things are accelerating, and they certainly are accelerating, it's hard to just even keep up with what's going on without falling behind. It's even more difficult to try to move ahead and to sustain the kind of effort that moves one ahead. So there are very, very few people. We're actually behind right now because we've slowed down because of the fall, as it's called in Lemuria. And we're actually behind the pace because we're so deep in matter and we're so clung into and bound up in matter that we're actually behind. So we not only have to just keep abreast, we have to catch up and keep abreast and then think about moving forward. Now, because of the extremity of the effort, there are two groups of people, two groups in our human life wave. There are one, the normal people. That is, people who just want to go along and go with the flow, with the pace of evolution, and they feel perfectly attuned and perfectly comfortable with that. This comprises the vast majority of all people. Then there are what could be called pioneers. These are people who like doing extreme exertions, making great efforts to move forward. And they're willing to go at any pace because they're usually driven by a sense of urgency, because they recognize the difficulties that humanity has gotten into and the dangers of falling behind to such extent that we could fall out of the evolutionary path altogether. This urgency, when it once gets into one gets a quickened pace of living. And this quickened pace of living then becomes almost like some sort of artistic climax. And with that artistic climax, there is, you build pell-mell to some kind of end. Things go faster and faster and faster. This same division can be found throughout nature. Probably one of the best places that one finds it the most common place, the best place to describe the whole idea is in the life of a cell. There are two distinct parts to a cell, as we can see from the largest cells that we see, like our eggs, our cells. There is a nucleus, and then there's the regular protoplasm. The work that is done in the main body of the cell, in the white of the cell, is most of the ongoing functional metabolic activity. And that's sort of like the ordinary people. And this constitutes the great the great majority of us. It constitutes the people who are content and feel most comfortable spiritually, inwardly, by being with the times. In fact, such people even feel that it's odd to try to be a pioneer, and it certainly is odd to try to be behind the times. And so this is the majority of people. No matter what kind of cell it is, it has its function, and the general function is carried on in the main part of the cell. Then you have the nucleus of the cell, and the nucleus of the cell is where all of the control takes place, all of the regulatory work, all of the creative work, the genetic changes, the decisions when the cell is going to divide, how it's going to divide, what the function of the new cell is going to be. All of those things are determined at sort of the center. It does the creative part of things. So that is sort of like the pioneers. That's like the people who are trying to move ahead. They're trying to do the creative work. They're trying to interpret the inner meaning of life rather than just going along and experiencing it. And that is it. Now, just because there are these pioneers that are trying to move ahead, that does not mean they are initiates. They're not necessarily equal. That because there are people that are trying to forge forward and are being accelerated in their activities, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are initiates. Initiate, as used by the mystery schools, has a very specific, a very special meaning. Anyone who puts forth a great effort and tunes into what is within the self, what is within the whole being, can move ahead as a pioneer. But they aren't necessarily an initiate, so it's time to talk about initiates and the tradition, or actually it's more than a tradition, it actually has to do with the nature of reality itself. Okay, so we go back to Lemuria and what is called the fall. And in our Western tradition, this is described as the biblical Garden of Eden. We had ADM, Adam, meaning whole, crossed an L, huh? Whole or universal man of red earth. The red earth part comes from the fact that the earth still was red, it was still molten, it was still glowing with heat. If you could see it with a clairvoyant vision, as the earth formed, it was a very hot ball, almost like you see when you're in a blacksmith shop, which you don't see much anymore. And the whole or universal means that the differentiation within the organism and within all of humanity hadn't taken place as it has now. And it is pictured the original Osiris, or the original Dionysus, were pictured as whole beings. And the original Osiris was pictured as covering the whole cosmos. This is, if you're interested in Kabbalism, this is the Adam Kadmon. or the atom primus. Not necessarily the atom Adami, which is the normal human being. Oh, golly. We might just as well have turned on the air conditioning. Oh, I think he's just testing to see that he got it fixed. I don't know. So, after the fall, the atom fell into material differentiation, and that material differentiation separated us into many different kinds of activity. So that's where the whole man comes from. So Adam then represents the first human. And when that human was divided into two poles, or into bodies of two poles, those that were choosing incarnations in the female type of body were symbolized by Eve, and those that were in the male type of body were symbolized by Adam. And they lived in a place called the Garden of Eden, which was obviously symbolic of the fact that they had clairvoyance. The book of Romans in the New Testament tells that very clearly, that from the times of Adam we could see to the very Godhead itself, saying that we had a clairvoyance. In the Garden of Eden there were 4 rivers that flowed, and the 4 rivers that flowed in there were like the 4 ethers running through the etheric body, and it showed the type of etheric vision that we had. But Adam and Eve had 3 children: Abel, Cain, Seth. Abel represents the creation of early Adam and Eve before the fall. It was a divinely inspired procreation. It was inspired by the angels and directed and carried out by the angels, and there was a kind of virginity to it. There was hardly even an awareness, what is now called carnal knowledge. It says Adam knew Eve. But in the early stages of our procreative activity, we didn't even recognize that there was somebody out there. We just recognized the way dogs recognize each other. They see an internal picture. And to know that someone had an out exterior didn't have. So Abel represents a kind of innocence. Cain symbolically represents the child of Eve plus the Lucifer spirit, Samael. This is a product, a creation of a demigod and a human. And Cain slew Abel. That is, made conditions such that it was no longer possible to have this innocent kind of condition. The Adam and Eve fall resulted in Cain, it resulted in murder. Sexuality in that sense led to an awareness of death. And the selfish use of the creative sexual energy led to the selfish prohibition of life in a body to murder. So, all right. And then the Bible tells us that Adam knew Eve, and when he knew Eve, she bore him Seth. And Seth then represents the child of man and woman, and Cain represents the child of man and the demigods, and Abel represents an unsullied humanity. Those people don't normally incarnate the way we incarnate. They have different kinds of experiences, and very rarely do they come into our sphere at all. These people, the Canaanites, the children of Cain, are obviously, since Samael didn't hang around, they're called children of the widow. And they're all considered sort of like orphans. And because there was a quality, a fiery quality from the Lucifers that we've talked about in the past, that these are called children of fire. Firelings, you might say. And this involves Cain and Tubal-Cain and Jubal, and there's a number of them listed in the Bible. They invent agriculture, and they invent all of the domestic arts and sciences and things like that. They can't leave the world as it is. They must bring a creative fire to it. They must try to change it. The children of Seth are associated with humanity, and rather than being called children of the widow, they're sometimes called sons of man. Like Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. And they're associated, their temperament, we're talking about something now in the same way that humanity was divided into bodies that were male and female, humanity was also divided into internal temperaments that are either firelings or waterlings. The children of Cain or the children of Seth. Now, unlike the body change, which you can alternate, you can take your turns, as being a male or a female, and sometimes you may want to stay in one for several lives, one kind of body for several lives. Sometimes you stay in the other for several lives. Unlike that, the division into children of fire or children of water carries throughout all of your incarnations. For all into the future, you are either a fiery creator or you are one that has a lot of faith. The battles that, if you read the early epistles, like the struggles between John and James and the early letters in the Bible, one will say, faith has got to do it. And another one will say, but faith without works is nothing. The Canaanites are the works people, and the Sethites are the faith people. They do things by feeling, they do things by acceptance, they do things by drawing things into them. In general, the masses of Canaanites are called Freemasons, having little to do with the order of free and accepted Masons. And the children of water are called Catholics, Universalists, having little to do with the Catholic Church. You can be in a Catholic Church and truly be a Freemason, and you can belong to the Freemasons and truly have a Catholic temperament that you carry with you. And these are differentiations. These two types of people you can find everywhere. Sometimes there are periods in evolution that the Catholics dominate, and sometimes that there are times when the Freemasons dominate. Usually when the sign is precessing, when the equinox is precessing through positive signs, the Freemasons dominate society. And when the equinox is proceeding through negative signs, the Catholics are present. The heroes or heroines of each of these are different. The Freemasons have as their hero the master builder, either somebody who is a conqueror or a creator or somebody like that. Almost always masculine. The Catholics have as their heroine a divine mother figure, either Kuan Yin or the Virgin Mary or Guadalupe or something like that. It's their temperament that they have as their ideal, a feminine image. Now, these two streams have been rivals throughout all evolution, and there have been struggles between them for the control of humanity and human evolution. Clearly, this type of class is highly Freemasonic. And though I don't believe in rivalry and I don't believe in competition, I do think it's for the betterment of humankind that the dominant influence be Freemasonic. Because you not only know that something is true, but you know why it's true. When one makes the extreme effort that we're talking about in order to move forward in evolution, there are two different grades of extreme efforts. One is from those with the Catholic temperament. If one makes an extreme effort for union with the divine and carrying out the divine plan and purpose, one is called a mystic. Whereas if one approaches life through works and through knowledge and through extreme efforts along those avenues, such an one is called an occultist. Truly, no work can be done esoterically without a blend of both. You cannot even forge the spinal fire for clairvoyance if you're an occultist unless you have some of the devotion. And a mystic can't do it just simply on pure faith alone. That has to be bolstered by knowledge. And so the extreme tendencies, the more they unite, the more likely the spiritual growth will take place. Now, in terms of the evolution, since the times of Lemuria, each of these groups has had special work. And we'll talk primarily about the Freemasonic side, since that's what the whole outlook is that we are exploring. In Lemuria, the Canaanites were especially wrapped up with the work of the stratification of the desire body and tying it together with the concrete mind, which developed a lower or a second self. And this made them much more keenly cunning types of beings. And this led to the Canaanites, to the occultists, to the firelings, to being ready to try to move, because once there was the possibility of the fall, there was also the possibility of liberation through moving forward quickly. Once we had the basic freedom as human beings to choose for ourselves, then we had the freedom to do it at whatever rate we wanted to do it and at whatever degree of intensity. And so that when we got into Atlantis, in Atlantis, beings came to us from Mercury. Humans from Mercury did some catch-up work by helping us out from our retarded states. They're called the Mercurians. And on the other side, where people accepted things by faith and accepted authority and followed the chain of authority, they were helped by the Venusians. That is, the beings that came from Venus who were also doing catch-up work by helping us. And the Mercurians created what were called the Mercurial schools of the mysteries. Which they are still called to this day. They're associated with another name for Mercury, Hermeticism. In fact, all of the mystery schools are associated, well, we'll come to the symbol later on. Now, the mysteries are unknown things in evolution, because once we came to know ourselves, we also understood that there were things that we didn't know, and they were mysteries to us. The Catholic temperament also has mysteries. However, the Catholic attitude toward the mysteries is altogether different. That attitude is a mystery is something that inspires some kind of awe and wonder in you, but it's not something to be solved. The Mercurial schools of the mysteries love solving the mysteries, love shattering them, love cutting through the Gordian knot. And so, when the mysteries were instituted, they were instituted for those who wanted to move forward to solve the riddles of evolution, to find the purpose of things, and who wanted to do that primarily by their own works, who wanted to do that through their own mind and through a strong individual effort of that type. Now, when in Atlantis, the mysteries were something very much different than they are now. You didn't have to teach anybody how to be clairvoyant, because everybody was. You didn't have to teach anybody magic, because everybody could see the forces of magic that went through things. And it would be silly to teach anybody to do something like that when they already knew how to control nature. They knew the forces that were in them. But they didn't know anything about the material world. And so the mysteries in Atlantis were based on helping people to really discover the material world. And there were great experiments. And they were like science projects, you might say. And probably the greatest of these experiments, at least that was pulled off, is called the Great Pyramid. Sometimes called Cheops, which was not built 25,000 years ago, as archaeologists think now. It was probably something more like 250,000 years ago, and maybe even longer than that. If we read the historians that had records from it, they go way without even the memory of nature. If we read Julius Firmicus Maternus, he talks about the Egyptians having numbers of star observations going that far. The Great Pyramid was a science experiment in that it introduced people to the sciences, the technology, and the crafts of the material world. That all of the people that built the Great Pyramid were people that were learning about the material world. They could see the essence or the meaning of what we call laws of nature in the inner worlds, but they couldn't see the forms or the outer shell in the material world. And so in building the Great Pyramid, they built an edifice that had in it all of the invisible things that they could see that would later become the knowledge of the material world. This is why there are so many things that relate to astronomy, and that relate to chemistry, and that relate to physics, and that relate to meteorology, and numerous other things that are built right into the Great Pyramid. So all of the sciences are built right into it. as well as all of the arts, color and music, and all of those things are built right into in some ways, the Great Pyramid. If everything were completely open in it, it could be used as a gigantic musical instrument. And the number of blocks and things like that even show sequences of musical differentiations. You know, how many vibrations and such like that. It's an amazing thing. Like if you take the coffer in the king's chamber and rap against it, it gives you a perfect pitch. I don't forget what key it is, but it gives you an exact sound of a note. And so this is what the mysteries were in those times. Then after the flood, in the post-Atlantean times, in our times, which could be called Aryan times, we were much more differentiated into different cultures. And so if we read in history, if we read in Indian history, or if we read in Persian history or Greek history, we learn about the different mysteries being associated with different societies. And so they were then the epitome of different race religions, because this was the time that differentiation was the primary keynote kind of thing. In fact, people that wanted to advance in the mysteries, people like Pythagoras and other people, even Plato, had to go to different cultures to learn all of the mysteries, because some of the mysteries were associated with one culture, some were associated with another. And then in our times, when we had once closed off the clairvoyance, and we became completely self-conscious of ourselves as separate individuals in both personality and individual spiritual focus, then it was time to turn around and go the other direction by taking a leap of faith and accepting the invisible and move forward in evolution. And so the mysteries changed between Atlantis to our times. In fact, early in the Aryan times, it was even kind of dangerous, because sometimes the connections to the body were made so firmly, and sometimes the bodies were so hereditarily suited to a given culture or a given racial type that one had to be very careful about taking people out of the body, because it could result in instant death. And so there were all kinds of dangerous tests and trials and things like that were brought about. You know, they had measurements, and one of them, Plato tells very clearly, if you didn't know how a person was going to respond when they left the body, if they couldn't control their desire body, it could be terrible. So what they would do is get them terribly drunk, and if they could control themselves really well when they were drunk, then that was a pretty good sign that if they were taken out of the body, they wouldn't fall prey to all kinds of selfish desires or all kinds of uncontrolled desires. Now, somewhere along the line, an event occurred, which we're going to talk a lot about later, and that is the advent of Christ. And the mysteries changed with the coming of Christ. That is, they were no longer associated with any given race or any given culture. Though there still are race, religion, mystery schools for people who are deeply ground into a race, who are not ready yet to accept a universalistic outlook on life and to see the oneness. And a big difference in the post-Christian mysteries were not based on any special separative type of culture. The post-Christian mysteries are instead when one is freed from the subjective outlook of one view from one culture or from one religion, then one can be more objective. And so now in post-Christian times, all of the mysteries are based not on a cultural or racial or religious specialization, but they are instead based on objectivity to the basic structure of the primordial atom itself. That is, the principles that run through the cosmos, what takes place in what period, in what revolution, and what kind of evolutionary advance is made at every step becomes a very objective thing. And these become the indices, and these become the goals of the mystery schools. So then, we're ready to look at initiation. Literally, the word initiation means beginning. And an initiation is the beginning of a new and higher stage or step forward in evolution. And it's not based on any criterion of the school. It is based on whether you can live that stage of evolution. If you can attune the life of your character to bring it, to advance it to that stage of consciousness, to that type of activity, then you begin a new phase of evolution. So the initiations are beginnings in objective states based on the principles that underlie the creation and continuance of the universe. So they're very clearly staged activities. In fact, the symbol for the mysteries has been what has been associated with Mercury. I think I've mentioned that old story of the seer. What was his name? The Theban seer. Oh my goodness. What's going on with my memory? He was out walking one day, and Theseus. No, not Theseus. I thought of Theseus and Perseus. Oh, I had it and lost it. This is 10 minutes of terror on a very valuable time on a tape. Tiresias. He was out walking one day, and he saw two serpents copulating, which is a very, very rare event. And what he did is he had a walking stick with him, and he stuck it in between them. And when he did that, he had an immediate remembrance of a previous life as a woman. He remembered the totality of the life. And this is according to the myth. And then he went on with his life, and he was a seer from that point on. No, he was at a later point that the seership came in. And at another time later in life, he was out walking, and the same thing happened. And he saw two snakes copulating, and he put his walking stick between them again, and he had the remembrance of a life going further back yet, when he was a man. And supposedly, one day, Zeus and Hera were arguing about who enjoyed copulation most, whether a male did or whether the female did. And they decided the only person who could decide objectively who was right was somebody who had seen their lives both ways. And so they went to Tiresias as the judge, and they asked Tiresias who enjoys copulation more. And Tiresias, with no hesitation, said the woman enjoys it more. And for that, Zeus struck him blind immediately. But Hera, she couldn't undo what Zeus did, but instead she gave him second sight. And he was then a seer, clairvoyant for the rest of his days. There are all sorts of things in the mystery, in the myth, but there is famous winged ball of the Egyptians, and the two serpents, the black serpent and the white serpent. Let's make the white serpent whiter by making him fatter. This is involution. The black serpent is involution. And the white serpent is evolution. And this has always been the symbol, not only of doctors, but all the first healers were the initiates. It's when they were true healers. And this is a symbol of the primordial atom. Remember, we talked about it a long time ago as being a very complex spiral that this is a gross simplification of. And this is the Saturn period, the Sun period, the Moon period, and the Mars half of the Earth period. And then this is the Mercury half. And then this is the Jupiter period. This is the Venus period. And this is the Vulcan period. And we see the nocturnals on one side and the diurnals on the other side, at least of the planets that are listed here. And so we see the whole path of involution and evolution. There are several important things about this symbol. The winged ball was the concept of the divine, and the two serpents are the path of coming into matter and the path of going out of matter. And they represent the general path that the ordinary people follow. But the pioneer types of people who want to move ahead, they go right straight up the pipe. And each place where there is a meeting of the serpent, this talks about where the reflective parts of the creative activity are united. The really important thing about the symbol is that the tails of the serpents don't meet. There's a gap. And this is the time of darkness. And we have to take a great leap of faith to go from one serpent to the other. And that means that we have to, out of blind faith, we have to be willing to accept the Spirit. How does the Bible say it? To know God, you must believe that God is. And one has to be willing to take that step as part of our fall into matter in order to leap onto the other side of evolution. But if at this point in the human period, because this is basically the bottom loop here is where we are human-like, is where we have the opportunity for getting on the straight line path and not, like roads go up a mountain, they curve back and forth to make it easier. But if you want to go overland and go straight up, you've got to take really tough, hard blows. You can get up faster, and you'll probably be much stronger, if not worn out, by doing it that way. But it's not an easy way at all. So what we're saying is that unions of the involution and evolution, where the reflections are fulfilled, where the purpose of the involution is fulfilled in creative evolution, at those mergers are where the initiatory points are to be found. So initiations then are basically microcosmic relivings of creation. And that when you relive a quality of creation, then you are, if you do it voluntarily and create with what you're given, that is an initiation. An initiation is not a ceremony. It's not something that you can purchase. It's something that you have to be able to live. You have to be, to a certain degree, creative. You have to be, to a certain degree, able to concentrate your energies or to concentrate your focus of attention on something so that you can unify yourself with it. And you have to do a great deal of service, of help work, of giving work. And so basically, the three phases of initiation are like the three phases of evolution. The first stage, at least in the early initiations, are you pass through death. It's sometimes called the little death. You leave your body behind as though dead, and you do it as a voluntary act. And when you do so, you see your entire life backwards. And you relive a purgatory, you relive a first heaven, and you experience all you can of this life. Plus, in some mystery schools, you go back and you see everything you did in various periods and in various epochs and things like that. It's really quite an intense kind of thing. When you have once gone through death and faced yourself for what you are and have taken the essence out of those experiences from the past, then you awaken a concentration in the now, and the power that you have available to you now because of what you have remembered from the past, you now are taught, or you now learn, sometimes on your own, how to creatively use as what would be called a magician. But it doesn't mean that you're some special kind of, that it's some kind of special profession or anything like that. It means that you are now a creator instead of just sort of a follower along in evolution. And so the creative work is sometimes called magic, and it's called magical because it uses things that most people haven't gotten to yet, and the people that are following the ordinary, following the snake-like path will get to it eventually. And so that the first two stages are like a death and a remembrance of the past, which is usually very, very painful because you have to admit all sorts of things to yourself and you have to work on overcoming them. And then you do a forward-going type of work by learning what kind of a talent you can apply to creative activity. And then the third phase of evolution is sort of like a hint. It's like when your moment is expanded and you can see, it's almost like playing a piece of music. You can sense what the next note is going to be. You can feel it. And with the new insight that one has from initiation, one can see the next stage of evolution, and therefore one knows what to work toward, so that the things from the past that are now creative powers can be directed toward an objective, toward a goal. That's obviously living right in touch with the purpose of evolution. So an initiation is not something that happens in a dream. It is a full living through in total waking consciousness. In the post-Christian times, there's no way that you can be entranced to be initiated. You have to be wide awake and do it in that way. So all of the stages of initiation are related to the activities of creation in the primordial atom. The initiations themselves have been categorized or broken up in different ways at different times and by different groups. He's waking up. We remember also from a talk a long time ago when we were talking about Lemuria, we said at the same time that humanity was divided into male and female and into children of fire and children of water, it was also spectrally divided, so that there were seven rays that are associated with the seven primary colors, the seven original creative words, and such like that. And that each of us has an internal quality that is associated with one of these basic seven principles. So, when it comes to attuning ourselves to our basic nature in the early initiations, we are attracted to a mystery school that is of the ray that we are in. So there are seven different mystery schools. And a mystery school is not something that you right away to and say, initiate me, or you meet somebody on the street and they say, yeah, give me $150 and I'll initiate you, and you'll be a freer person. No, a mystery school is when you attune yourself to your own character and you can creatively live a certain way. You are drawn like birds of a feather to people of a common temperament, and you are then drawn to a mystery school by becoming what you are. Now, the seven mystery schools may have different outlets according to your culture, because remember we said there still are some that are associated with different religions and are associated with different cultures and things like that. And so there are maybe different outlets, but there are basically seven mystery schools. But there are 9 lesser initiations. At least in the modern Western schools, there are 9 lesser initiations. And all of this is attuning to the cosmos. And so usually the first initiation is associated with Saturn in the Saturn period. And the first degree initiate usually on a Saturday night, usually at midnight, experiences in the initiation an awakening with the clairvoyance, as well as seeing all of the past life. When the clairvoyance is unfolded, one sees oneself in the Saturn period and in the Polarian epoch and all of the things that they're capable of seeing within the Saturn vision. So this is Saturday, beginning at, Saturday begins at dawn on Saturday, not on midnight after Friday, as we think of. These days of the week begin with sunrise. So The second initiation occurs on Sunday, in which time we relive the sun period and the Hyperborean epoch, and as many things as we're capable of gleaning out of all of the sun stages of evolution. The third takes place on Monday, and we relive Lemuria, the moon period, and as many things as we're capable of assimilating from the various manifestations of the moon. And we go through a Mars initiation, which takes us into Atlantis, and it also takes us to the whole first half of the evolutionary period, and it gives us some hint by reflection of what takes place in the second half of the Earth period. The next is the Mercury initiation, at which time we can see the whole of the Earth period all the way up to the end, and we remember, by that time we have probably remembered all of our past lives in the first half of the Earth period. The other mysteries are celebrated at new moon and full moon, and they're celebrated at summer solstice and winter solstice. And these carry us all the way up to the powers that we will have at the end of the Earth period, so that we will then be complete in our human nature when we have gone through the 9 lesser mysteries. This is something that usually takes several lives of very concerted effort to go through these mysteries. Even to have experienced one initiation of the modern Western type of initiation is something quite amazing, something quite dramatic. In my life, I've rambled around a little bit, and I've seen a few people that I think are bona fide positive clairvoyants. Very few of them. I've seen a lot of psychic clairvoyance, but very few that I've seen that have a positive control clairvoyance. But I have yet to meet one person that, from my looking from the dark, not being in the light, I have yet to meet one person that I consider an initiate, because it's really a high state. Then there are, we've always talked about the 7 and the 5. We said that there are 7 manifest principles and 7 abstracting assimilative principles. There are 5 greater mystery schools. And there are 4 greater initiations. And these are associated with the first of the greater initiations, wakes up our consciousness, the Jupiter period type of consciousness, which we talked about last time. When we can live fully in the human spirit, and we can create life from the mineral state, in that we have very lively, vital picture thoughts. The next one is associated with the Venus period, when we can externalize our creations. And then there is the Vulcan evolution, in which we can think thoughts that can think for themselves, and we can understand the meaning of meaning. And finally, there is, I'm talking about something very, very august, and I'm just passing over it quickly, and I'm not going into extensive detail, partly because it is so far beyond our development that to not treat it with reverence, or to try to think that we could understand with our present consciousness something that is so profound, would verge on sacrilege, or it would be blasphemous. And then there is the fourth and final of the great initiations, is where one reaches a liberation. That means, in effect, they have accomplished everything that can be accomplished in our evolution. At this time, one is given one of three options. One can stay here and subject oneself to destiny, which means one very lovingly takes on all the limitations and all of the sufferings, and even worse kinds of sufferings, because people usually treat the most loving people the most unjustly, and help the people that are left behind. That's the first option. The second option is to move into some other kind of higher evolutionary scheme on a higher cosmic plane. And the third option is to reabsorb back into the absolute. And just whatever one does there, I assume, work on creative work for the next great creation. Those are the three options that are usually given. Obviously, we're a long way from all of them, and it's always hard to talk about these things because you feel so inadequate talking about them. Now, because initiations are a microcosm, and because the macrocosm manifests itself everywhere in microcosm throughout the entire cosmos, this means literally that the structure of initiation, the keys to initiation, can be found almost anywhere in the cosmos. That means whatever in your human evolution, in your basic day-to-day existence, whatever you are doing, you can do it with an eye to the creation and to the fulfillment of the different stages of the primordial atom. For example, this structure in a more complex form, the caduceus of Mercury, is the basis for the periodic table. And then through the study of chemistry and through the application of chemistry, one can learn insights into the nature of the mysteries and begin an unfoldment through that type of work. Or you can find it in the tables of animal taxonomy, that is looking at the different evolutionary stages. You can find the evolution, like our past evolution, when we threw off the animal forms to become human. Those are reflections of future stages. And so, like by being a biologist, you can unfold the evolutionary secrets in the mysteries. Or you can find it in astronomical cycles, or you can follow it in anthropological cultures, or you can find it in tone rows of music, or you can find it in sequences of colors in art. And basically, if one is looking with the inner eye, if one is living creatively, if one is giving oneself to the creative work, the keys to advancement, to moving ahead, can be found in almost any human endeavor. However, that doesn't mean that you specialize. Normally, like in the ancient times when we were still having the race religion types of mysteries, the activities were separated from each other. Now, in the post-Christian times, usually when you find an initiate, you find somebody that is well developed in science and in art and in philosophy of religion. All of the three basic attributes of character are well-rounded, because we are becoming whole and complete beings. And we cannot then just specialize on one side of evolution. We generally work our way through all of evolution. Okay. Now, we've talked a little bit about human initiation, but now we have a really difficult thing that we're going to treat in a very mechanical type of way, basically because I don't know how to treat it any other way, because we're working our way now toward the second topic of the night. Where do we stand in time? All right, we're probably going to run into about an hour 45, maybe 2 hours, but maybe if I can speed up, we can make it. It's a long talk tonight. Now, we're only talking about human initiation for us as human beings. But those are not the only initiations that have been. At one time, well, let's take the human initiation and carry it further. Normally, we have a physical body, a vital body. This is in the chemical region. This is in the etheric region. We have a desire body, which is in the desire world. And we have a mind, which is in the world of thought. That is, we are physical beings. We have objective forms, and these forms live because we have a vital nature, and they grow, and they're capable of transmitting energy through them. And because we have a desire nature, we have the ability to motivate, to feel what comes in, so that they're not just impressions, but that they produce inward feelings, or that from our inward feelings we can actually move ourselves and bring something to pass. And through our mind we can see there are reasons, and we can see that there are connections. But we are, in spirit, we have a human spirit. That is a focus of self, and this focus of self can direct this personality, and the experiences in the personality, it can relate to the divine, to the higher purposes, to the basic ideas of all existence. And finally, we have a life spirit, or not finally, we have a life spirit, which means we're capable of selfness, and the basic idea of creative imagination and of love. And then we have the will to live from the divine spirit. This is what an ordinary human being is made of. Now, through the process of initiation, we can raise these all much higher, so that we can actually, an initiate can bring the physical to the thought level. And can bring the etheric to the world of the vital body, to the level of human spirit. And then the desire body to life spirit. And finally the mind to divine spirit. So that we're actually living on a much higher level. That because we can actually replicate through the initiatory work the basis of how the physical was formed in thought in the first place. And then when we can take the essence of our physical and function at the height of initiation. We've gone through all the initiations. We can function with the physical being in the world of thought. This means that the threefold spirit then can project way up through the 3/3 of virgin spirit and poke right into just the beginning of the world of God. So that this doesn't all sound like gobbledygook, I'll try to give you an idea of what I think this means. When a person goes as far as one can with initiation, they take all of the experience of evolution and they carry it beyond into the worlds that are usually only the properties of the divine, that go beyond the threefold spirit, and they take the essence of our creation, of our evolution, and bring it to the God consciousness. In our case, to the regions of virgin spirit, and right to the very beginning of the throne of the One. So that our lives are lived on a very, very profound level. Now, there are other beings that have been human-like. I'm not going to go through all of these tables because these tables are, that's the way we'll cut this very short. I won't go through all of these tables. The angels, when they were human-like, their physical was only as deep as the etheric. And consequently, when the angels reached their highest capable possibility of initiation, their physical was as deep as the human spirit in spirit. And in an analogous manner, the archangels, back in the Sun period, when they were human-like, their physical was no deeper than the desire world. And as a consequence, when they raise as far as they can through evolution, and they complete their divine spirit work, they can penetrate all the more deeply into the spiritual worlds, and their physical body is at the region of life spirit, and they extend well beyond the region of virgin spirit, and they go right into the consciousness of the world of God. This is very hard to conceive of. It's like taking all of the experience of evolution and putting it in godlike consciousness, which is even beyond our just basic watching of it all as virgin spirits, because we are silent watchers that watch it. And finally, the lords of the mind, who in the Saturn period made snowballs out of us when our physical bodies were made out of thought stuff, when they reach their initiation, their physical body, when they reach their highest initiation in their human-like state, their physical went so deep into the spiritual world that it had to do with the will to be in God, and it penetrated all the way to the heart of the being that we call God in spiritual consciousness. And this, obviously, from our talk last week, we can see that this has something to do with the fusion of the physical body and the mind, especially the archetypal region of the mind, and the divine spirit all into one, and that grand and glorious time in the future where we will see into God, and then the whole universe goes to sleep again. A lot of that work is done by the Lords of the Mind, or was precipitated by the Lords of the Mind. But I think it would be profaning of me to talk much more about this. The only reason I'm talking about this is because I'm trying to get to something. There are, from what I have said, there are three potential stages. There's the ordinary. There's the ordinary stage, which is the normal humanity, or what are now the normal angels or normal archangels or whatever. Then there are those that have passed through all of the initiates, and without an article, they are called highest initiate. And then, in this category of highest initiate, there is a central focus. So that we have the ordinary humanity, we have the highest initiate humanity, and then there is a central focus, which we won't really get to much tonight. Among the angels are the ordinary humanity. And the highest initiate of the angels is called in Western parlance, and the central focus of the highest initiate of the angels is called Jehovah, which represents, but is not it, it represents the third attribute of the divine. So Jehovah is not the one. It is a representation in the highest evolution of the angelic life wave of the third attribute of the divine. Of the archangels, the highest initiate stage is called Christ. And in Western parlance, it is called the Son, the central focus, which represents, but again is not the second attribute of the divine. It represents in the same way that a king used to represent the will of the people, or in the same way that a priest would represent the presence of God. The priest was not God, but represented the presence of it. And finally, we have of the archai, or lords of mind. There is no name given for the highest initiate. Both are given the Father. We won't go into the apparent sexism of this. So when one speaks of the Father, one is not speaking of the One. One is not speaking of God, the central focus of our being, but of the representation of the first or highest attribute of God as found in the central focus of the highest initiate group of the Lords of the Mind that is most capable of representing the One. And so that is what the Father represents. All right, now that brings us to the second purpose of our talk. And so we have to start all over again. And let's take like a pseudo-clairvoyant imagination. The earth, like a human, has an aura. In fact, the desire body aura of the earth stretches as far as Mars and Venus, so that there is an intermingling of auras between those great beings. And the desire body of each planet, the Earth included, is like the desire body of a human being. It's filled with color, and that color is the expression of emotion, desire, etc., of every being evolving in the Earth and of the planetary spirit of the Earth. Now, if one could move out into space with clairvoyant vision and look from a distance at the aura of the Earth, from the times of Lemuria to our times, one would see the colorful aura of the Earth getting slowly darker and darker. And it would get more and more murky. And this would continue, and it would get more and more ugly until there would be a sudden brilliant flash of light, and then there would be a significant lightening of the whole Earth, and then a gradual increase in brightness, a very gradual thing. Now, this would be very hard to see. The hard part of seeing would be the sacrifice that would have to be made. One would have to see the kinds of feelings that were associated with this darkening and with this murkiness. There would be, of course, all the other glorious, glamorous things that would be happening with the archangels and angels, and there would be all that creative work. But the human input to that would be all of the hatred and selfishness and anger and all of those things that were happening from the fall of humanity when we started working against the grain, when we started working against the purpose of evolution. And one could see that we were getting worse and worse, because in this period from Lemuria on, we were under what is called the religion of the Holy Spirit. That is the religion of separation, a race religion. And in this separation, as we were developing the mind, we were learning to free ourselves through cause and consequence. But things were so bad that almost all of our activity was spent in selfish endeavor, and all the new soul power that we gained from our last incarnation, we were trying to cash in on to selfish ends. Wars and strife of all kinds increased, and until we were in a danger of everybody not making it in evolution. And we were in a danger of even the Earth not being able to be carried on in evolution, because the physical Earth itself was our responsibility. And what we were doing is we were hardening it to such an extent that the mineral kingdom of the Earth and the general spirit of the Earth was not getting the experience that it needed. And so something had to be done. However, it's a tricky issue, because we were sort of exiled and we were sort of in quarantine in the material world, and the gods couldn't enter directly into the material world to influence. Plus, there was another problem, and that problem was that we were free. We were using our freedom to bind ourselves up by selfish causes and consequences, but nonetheless we were free. And so the divine hierarchies could not just take over and make us do what they wanted us to do. So something special had to be done. And it involved the height of freedom. Now, in the same way that it is possible to go backward in evolution, that same differing of pace also allows us to go forward in evolution. That same principle applies to the whole evolutionary scheme itself. In the same way that it was possible for us to go more deeply into matter and to become independent from the divine plan and work against it, also made possible the opportunity to have an even greater freedom, and to have that even greater freedom even though we didn't deserve it. So, something was given to us that we didn't deserve. And it was given with complete freedom, and it can be accepted in complete freedom or ignored in complete freedom. And that which was given is called in the Western world grace. And freedom involves creativity. And so, a kind of creative love was presented to us so that we could take it and live more creatively and less selfishly if we wanted to. Now, this creative love isn't like just pouring a bucket of water on a plant. Nothing in the cosmos is like that, especially in the spiritual worlds. It has to come in terms of a living being. Now, what we're going to talk about it in terms that are used in our Western religion. But what we're talking about here is not a religious issue. What we're talking about is a cosmic fact. And it doesn't have to have any of these names that we're going to use. In fact, the names that we've used here don't have to be used. In the spiritual world, there are other names that can be used. And those are names of power, that to call on these names is to have the power of those names. So we're not talking about a religious doctrine. What we're talking about is an experience of something that we can see as a fact.